For decades, Alison Krauss was the voice of angelic purity in American music. With over 27 Grammy Awards, countless platinum albums, and collaborations with legends like Robert Plant, she seemed unstoppable. Fans adored her quiet grace, her haunting fiddle, and her unmatched ability to make a song sound eternal. But then, suddenly, she was gone. No more major tours, no more chart-topping records. For someone who had been a constant presence in bluegrass and country music, Alison Krauss's disappearance from the spotlight was shocking. What really happened? Rumors spread about health problems, a broken spirit, and even the loss of her once flawless voice. For years, fans have wondered, why would one of the most awarded artists in history choose silence over stardom? The truth is far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. And it reveals a side of Alison Krauss that few ever got to see. But the real reason she disappeared is much darker.
Alison Maria Krauss was born on July 23, 1971, in Decatur, Illinois, into a family that seemed ordinary from the outside. Her father, Fred, was a German immigrant who taught psychology, while her mother, Louise, painted and nurtured Alison's creative spirit. Unlike many stars born into fame, Alison's childhood was quiet, even sheltered, but filled with a sense of discipline and artistry. By the time she was 5 years old, Alison's world had already shifted. While other children were learning nursery rhymes, she was learning the violin. And not just learning, it was as though the instrument had been waiting for her. She practiced obsessively, sometimes hours a day, even when her small hands could barely hold the bow. At 8 years old, she was already entering and winning fiddle contests. Judges noticed the shy little girl who barely spoke, yet transformed the room with her music. Music became her voice, the way she spoke to the world. But with this gift came something else: pressure. Even as a child, Alison carried the weight of expectation. Her teachers and peers called her a prodigy. Family and friends marveled at her talent. And while other kids chased normal childhood dreams, Alison Krauss carried a violin case everywhere she went. Her teenage years weren't filled with rebellion or chaos. Instead, they were filled with the sound of practice rooms, competitions, and stages where she stood alone with her fiddle. In that solitude, her identity was being forged, not just as a musician, but as someone who would one day bear the crushing responsibilities of perfection. It was in those years that Alison's path to stardom became inevitable. But hidden beneath the applause was the beginning of a silent burden that would follow her into adulthood.
By the time Alison Krauss turned 14, she had already signed her first record deal with Rounder Records, a feat almost unthinkable for someone so young. At an age when most teenagers were just discovering themselves, Alison was stepping into studios, recording tracks that would quietly reshape American roots music. Her breakthrough came in 1985 with the release of her debut album, Too Late to Cry. Critics were stunned. Here was a teenager who played the fiddle with haunting precision and sang with a voice so pure it seemed timeless. But it wasn't until she began leading the group Union Station that Alison Krauss's influence truly exploded. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Alison and Union Station redefined bluegrass, bringing it to mainstream audiences without ever losing authenticity. Albums like So Long, So Wrong and New Favorite earned her multiple Grammy Awards,
cementing her reputation as a once-in-a-generation talent. And then came the collaborations. Her partnership with Robert Plant on the 2007 album Raising Sand stunned the world. The unlikely pairing of a Led Zeppelin frontman and a quiet bluegrass fiddler resulted in a masterpiece that swept the Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. Suddenly, Alison Krauss wasn't just a bluegrass star, she was a global icon. She became the most decorated female artist in Grammy history, surpassing legends across all genres. Fame, fortune, and critical acclaim followed her everywhere. But behind the glowing headlines, Alison felt something else creeping in. The more she rose, the more she felt the weight of expectations pressing down. Every performance had to be flawless. Every note had to shimmer. And every step of her journey took her further away from the quiet girl who once played fiddle contests in Illinois. The world saw a woman at the peak of her power, but Alison Krauss felt the cracks beginning to form.
At the height of her fame, Alison Krauss seemed untouchable. She was winning Grammy after Grammy, her albums sold millions, and she had become a respected figure across genres. But beneath the perfection, Alison was facing battles no one could see. Her voice, so angelic and flawless, began to falter. By the mid-2000s, Alison started experiencing dysphonia, a vocal condition that strained her ability to sing. For someone whose entire career depended on purity of tone, this was devastating. She once admitted in interviews that she could no longer control her voice the way she used to, and every performance became a test of endurance rather than joy. The pressure of constant touring and perfectionism compounded the problem. Alison, naturally shy and introverted, found the spotlight exhausting. Crowds expected a radiant performer, but she often felt drained and isolated. The stage that once gave her freedom slowly became a prison. Friends and collaborators noticed the change. While she remained professional, Alison grew quieter, withdrawing from the industry that had once celebrated her. Rumors began circulating. Was she sick? Was she done with music forever? Fans searched for answers as her public appearances grew rare. The truth was simple but painful. Alison Krauss was breaking under the very thing that made her famous. The voice that brought her glory was now betraying her, and the endless demand of the spotlight was stripping away her peace. By the late 2010s, Alison's presence in the mainstream had nearly vanished. Tours slowed, recording projects became rare, and the once ever-present star was slipping away into silence. The woman who had given the world some of its most beautiful music was now fighting to protect what little remained: her health, her voice, and her sanity. For fans, the silence was deafening. Alison Krauss, once the most celebrated voice in bluegrass and country, seemed to vanish just as quickly as she had risen. No dramatic farewell tour, no major announcement, just a gradual disappearance from the spotlight. The climax of this hidden struggle came when Alison herself admitted in interviews that she had lost her voice. Not in the metaphorical sense, but literally. The dysphonia that plagued her made it impossible to sing as she once had. For an artist whose identity was built on purity and perfection, this was a devastating tragedy. She confessed that every note felt like a fight, and that the effortless sound fans remembered was no longer within her reach. It was as though the very gift that defined her had betrayed her. Unlike other stars who clung to the stage until the end, Alison chose something different. She chose silence over imperfection. This was not the fall of someone reckless, nor the scandal of a star destroyed by excess. Instead, it was the slow, heartbreaking realization that even the most angelic voices are not eternal. Fans who once cheered her in sold-out arenas were left with memories, albums, and the haunting absence of new music. For Alison Krauss, the tragedy wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was the quiet decision to step away, to protect her dignity, her health, and perhaps the small piece of peace she had always longed for. The world may have lost her voice on stage, but the echo of her silence became its own kind of story, one that left fans asking why, and one that made the truth all the more painful when it finally surfaced. Even though Alison Krauss stepped away from the spotlight, her influence continues to echo across generations. Her recordings remain timeless, studied by young musicians who still marvel at her ability to make the fiddle sing and her voice float like air. For many, she represents not just a performer, but the very soul of bluegrass and Americana. Her collaborators, from Robert Plant to the countless artists she quietly supported, often speak of her humility and grace. Despite her legendary status, Alison never sought fame for its own sake. She sought authenticity, and that is what endeared her to millions. In interviews, Robert Plant once called their work together a life-changing experience, proof of how deeply she touched even the most seasoned legends. To her fans, Alison's withdrawal from the stage is bittersweet, a loss of presence, but a reminder that the music she left behind is eternal. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of Alison Krauss's journey, that even the brightest stars are still human, fragile in ways we may never see. And maybe the silence she chose speaks louder than any song she could have sung. She may have disappeared from the spotlight, but Alison Krauss will never disappear from the hearts of those who found truth, healing, and beauty in her music.